You're welcome to HDS 212, USA from Colony to Nationhood, Study Session 1. The history of the United States of America. The nation was created in 1776 with a declaration: "We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, to ordain and establish this Constitution for the United States of America." As the nation developed after emerging from the Revolutionary War with Great Britain, our former colonial overlord, as a new nation, it expanded westward from small settlements along the Atlantic coast, eventually including all the territory between the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans across the middle of the North American continent, as well as two non-contiguous states and a number of territories. At the same time, the population and the economy of the United States grew and changed dramatically. The population diversified as immigrants arrived from all countries of the world. From its beginning as a remote English colony, the United States has developed the largest economy in the world. Throughout its history, the United States had faced struggles both within the country, between various ethnic, religious, political, and economic groups, and with other nations. The efforts to deal with and resolve these struggles have shaped the United States of America into late 20th century. Early cultural interaction. The history of early American began with the collision of European, Native American, and West African in North America. Furthermore, the Europeans also made a discovery of America by accident, which later led to the creation of empires out of the conquest of indigenous people and the enslavement of Africans. During the course of their cultural interactions for centuries, the Africans and the Native American experienced enslavement, which brought about disaster for them, while the Europeans, on the other hand, experienced victory. However, their interaction was able to transform the three of them. Different societies of the Native Americans. The North American native groups are as many as the communities in which they dominated. However, the North American continent allowed different cultures to thrive, which range from nomadic to the kind of fixed, non-migratory life of farming communities. California. In California, there is a long coastline, a lush northwestern rainforest, and a parched southern desert, which people of California adapted to. The cassava pomo hunted waterfowl with slingshots and nets. The yak and hooper searched the forest for acorns and fished in mountain streams to the northwest coast. The importance of the sea cannot be underestimated, as well as the waterways and forests of the northwest coast, which sustained large communities all year round. On a coastline that stretched from what is now southern Alaska to northern California, people such as Quetzal, Noctal, and Hilda collected shellfish from beaches and hunted the ocean for whales, sea otters, and seals. Also, people like Quakiot declared masks and boats with magnificent totems, symbols of the ancestral spirits that guided each family. Quackit family also displayed their histories on huge totem poles set in front of their cedar plank houses, and the totems are designed in such a way that the quality of each family's own announced its wealth and status. Leading Quackit family also organized potlatches, elaborate ceremonies in which they gave away large quantities of their possessions. However, each family's reputation depended upon the size of its potlatch. In other words, the potlatch depended on how much wealth it gave away. Usually, a family might spend up to 12 years planning the event. Southwest. In the dry region of the Southwest, we have Pima and Pueblo tribes, who are the descendants of the Hokan and Anasazi. The area where they resided is Ash. In 1300, the Pueblo and a related tribe, the Opi, had left the caliph houses of their Anasazi ancestors. However, the Pueblo had their new settlement built near waterways like the Rio Grande, where they could get water to irrigate their farms, while the Hopi and the Akoma remained near the caliphs and developed irrigation systems. People lived in multi-story houses made of adobe or stone and engaged in corn, beans, melons, and squash farming. For tradition not to be erased, they constructed underground caves, or what is known as ceremonial chambers, for religious ceremonies and councils. Eastern woodlands of the Mississippi River. There is a sharp difference between the landscape of the Southwest and woodlands east of the Mississippi River. In the north, St. Lawrence and Great Lakes possessed hardwood forest up to the south, where we have the Gulf of Mexico. The tribes that lived in eastern woodlands, like Iroquois, constructed villages by engaging in forest clearing, as well as blended agriculture with hunting and gathering. All the tribes had much in common, and their means of transportation are foot and canoe. In eastern woodlands, the tribes have different languages, customs, and environments. Due to accessibility to wide supply of trees, most of the tribes engaged in craft business, as they used the woodworking tools to craft snowshoes and canoes. However, in the northeast, people experienced winters which could be long and harsh. As a result of this, they relied on wild animals for clothing and food, while the tribes in the southeast engaged in corn, squash, and beans farming because it is warmer. Cultural traits of Native Americans. Many Native American societies shared some certain cultural traits. Thus, many cultures shared patterns of trade, disposition to land use, certain religious beliefs, and social. Transcontinental trading networks. Each tribe of the native got established at different settlements. With these settlements, each settlement became known for particular products and skills. In Southwest, the Taos are known for potter. In Northwest Coast, the Nootka people are known for whaling, while in Upper Great Lakes, the people specialize in collecting white rice. Their products were traded both locally and long distance. The established trade networking of the Native American people brought them in contact with one another. The transcontinental trading network between the tribes opportuned each tribe to trade with one another without having physical or direct. This was achieved at different traders transporting to unfamiliar places through intermediaries. So extensive was the network of forest trail and river roads that an English sailor named David Ingram claimed in 1568 to have walked along Native American trade routes all the way from Mexico to the Atlantic coast. Land use. Land was of great importance to the Native American, though other goods are being sold, but they fail to sell their land, claiming it is a source of life to them. This was also evident in the settlement of one Blackfoot chief in 1800s, who said, "We cannot sell the lives of men and animals. Therefore, we cannot sell this land." Their disposition to land is against the belief of the Europeans, who believed in private ownership of land. These two different beliefs will bring about clashes between the duos. Native Americans disturb the land only for the most important activities, such as food gathering or farming. A female shaman or priestess from the Wintu of California also made disrespect for the land known when she had a chat with anthropologist Ditronili. Religious beliefs. In 1855, young chief of the Cases, who lived in what is now called Washington and Oregon, once said, "I hear what the ground says. The ground says it is the Great Spirit that placed me here. The Great Spirit tells me to take care of the Indians, who cultures believed in one supreme being known as Great Spirit, Great Mystery, the great creative power, or the Creator." From the above made statements, it is obvious that most of the Native Americans thought the natural world is filled with spirits. Past generations remained alive to guide the living. It was believed that every object, both living and non-living, possessed a voice that might be heard if one listened closely. Family as a social organization. Tribal custom thrived as a result of factors like bonds of kinship or strong ties among family members. There was mutual love between the elders and the young, as the elder passed instructions to them, while the young in return honored them and the departed ancestors. In each society, we have diverse chores allotted to both men and women, which varied from society to society. For example, the Iroquois and Hopi women claimed ownership of the household items, and the families traced their ancestry from mother to grandmother to great grandmother and so on. On the other hand, in other Native American culture, men hold the family possessions and trace their ancestry through their father's kin. Social order was based on division of labor. This was achieved by allotting tasks considering two factors like age, gender, and status. For example, in Kwaktu, the only task of the nobles was to ensure that Kwaktu law was obeyed by everyone, while slaves performed the most mental job. In all the Native American groups, family served as a major unit of organization, and this included aunts, uncles, cousins, and other relatives. However, some tribes further organized the family into clans or groups of families descended from a common ancestor. For example, in the Iroquois, members of a clan often lived together in huge bark-covered long houses. Community decision-making lied in the hands of all the families. However, all the Native American groups do not live together for long periods of time. In societies in which people hunted and gathered, Groups broke into smaller bands for hunting. For example, on the plains, families searched the grassland for buffalo. Groups like these reunited only to celebrate important occasions. In the late 1400s, on the eve of the encounter with the Europeans, the rhythms of Native American life were well established. Thus, changes that the encounter with the Europeans brought to the Native American societies were never imagined or planned for by anyone. Native America before the encounter with the Europeans. The old land and human societies were referred to by European explorer New World. Before the arrival of the Europeans, the Native Americans lived in isolation from the history, especially from the diseases, and occupied almost all the inhabitable parts of North and South America. The Native Americans who welcomed the first Europeans split into different tribes with 300 and 350 distinct languages, and their societies and ways of living differed greatly. The Aztecs of Mexico and the Incas of Peru constructed great empires, that is, Aztec Empire and Incas Empire. In what is now the United States, the Mississippian built cities surrounded by farmland between present-day St. Louis, Missouri, where their city of Chalkia was larger than medieval London, and Natchez, Mississippi. The Mississippian great son, King ruled authoritatively and was moved from place to place by servants accompanied by flute players. The Pueblo people of the Southwest lived in large towns, irrigated their dry land with river water, and traded with people as far away as Mexico and California. In the East, the people who eventually encountered English settlers differed, but they lived in similar ways. The duties of the women were to farm most of their food and gathered food in the woods, while the men were to hunt, fish, and made war. These people depended majorly on abundant wild game for protein. Thus, none of them kept herds of domestic animals. The families lived in groups loyal to a wider network of kin and to their clans. Some formed alliances called confederacies in order to uphold peace among neighbors and making war on outsiders. Even within these confederacies, however, everyday political organizations seldom extended beyond villages, and village chiefs ruled their independent-minded people by consent. European exploration. In the century before Columbus sailed to America, Western Europeans were unlikely candidates for worldwide exploration. The Chinese possessed the wealth and seafaring skills that would have enabled them to explore, but they had little interest in the world outside of China. The Arabs and other Islamic people also possessed wealth and skills, but they expanded into territories that were next to them and not across uncharted oceans. The Ottoman Turks captured Constantinople in 1453 and by 1520s had nearly reached Vienna. This conquest gave them control over the overland trade routes to Asia as well as the sea routes through Persian Gulf. The conquest also gave them an expanding empire to occupy their attention. Western Europeans, on the other hand, were developing the necessary wealth and technology and a compelling need to explore. A group of new monarchs were making nation states in Britain and in continental Europe states with unprecedentedly large treasuries and military establishments. The population of Western European nations were growing, providing a tax base and a labor force for new classes of large landowners. This elite provided markets for goods that were available only through trade with Asia. When the expansion of Islam gave control of eastern trade routes to Islamic middlemen, Western Europeans had strong incentive to find other ways to get to Asia. They were also developing sailing technology and knowledge of current and winds to travel long distance on the open sea. The Portuguese led the way. They copied and improved upon the designs of Arab sailing sea and learned to mount canoes on those ships. In the 15th century, they began exploring the west coast of Africa, bypassing Arab merchants to trade directly for African gold and slaves. They also colonized the Madeira Island, the Acros, and the Cape Verde Island and turned them into the first European slave plantations. The European explorers were all looking for an ocean route to Asia. Christopher Columbus sailed for the monarchs of Spain in 1492. He used the familiar prevailing winds of the Canary Islands of the new west coast of Africa and then sailed on. In about 2 months, he landed in Caribbean on an island in Bahamas, thinking he had reached the Eastern Indies. Columbus made 3 major voyages. He died in 1506, still believing that he had discovered a water route to Asia. The Spanish investigated further. Italian navigator Amerigo Vespucci sailed to northern coast of South America in 1499 and pronounced the land a new continent. European map makers named it America in his honor. Spanish explorer Vasco Núñez de Balboa crossed the Isthmus of Panama and in 1513 became the first of the European explorer of America to see the Pacific Ocean. That same year, another Spaniard, Juan Ponce de Leon, explored the Bahamas and Florida in search of the Fountain of Youth. The first European voyages to the north coast of America were old and forgotten. The Norsemen sailed from Greenland and stayed in Newfoundland for a time around 1000. Some scholars argued that European fishermen had discovered the fishing waters off eastern Canada by 1480, but the first recorded voyage was made by English navigator John Cabot, who sailed from England to Newfoundland in 1497. Giovanni da Verasno in 1524 and Jacques Cartier in 1534 explored nearly the whole Atlantic coast of the present United States for France. By that time, Europeans had scouted the American coast from Newfoundland to Brazil, while they continued to look for shortcuts to Asia. Europeans began to think of America for its own sake. Spain again led the way. Iroquois invaded Mexico in 1519, and Francisco Pizarro did the same in Peru in 1532. Nearly a full century before English or French colonization began. Cultural interaction, the Columbian exchange. What was to become American history began in a biological and cultural collision of European, Native Americans, and Africans. Europeans initiated this contact and often dictated its terms. For Native Americans and Africans, American history began in disaster. Native Americans suffered heavily because of their isolation from the rest of the world. Europe, Africa, and Asia had been trading knowledge and technologies for centuries. Societies on all three continents had learned to use iron and kept heads of domestic animals. Europeans had acquired gunpowder, paper, and navigational equipment from the Chinese. Native Americans, on the other hand, had none of this. They were often helpless against European conquerors with horses, firearms, and especially armor and weapons. The most disastrous consequence of the long-term isolation of the America was biological. Asians, Africans, and Europeans had been exposed to one another's diseases for millennia. By 1500, they had developed an old world immune system that partially protected them from most diseases. On average, Native Americans were bigger and healthier than the Europeans who first encountered them, but they were helpless against European and African diseases. Smallpox was the biggest killer, but illnesses such as measles and influenza also killed millions of people. The indigenous population of Mexico, for example, was more than 17 million when Cortes landed in 1519. By 1630, it had dropped to 750,000, largely as a result of disease. Scholars estimated that, on average, the population of a Native American population dropped 90% in the first century of contact. The worst wave of epidemics in human history cleared the way for European conquest. Europeans used the new lands as source of precious metals and plantation agriculture. Both were complex operations that required labor in large, closely supervised groups. Attempts to enslave indigenous peoples failed. An attempt to force them into other forms of bound labor was slightly more successful, but also failed because workers died of disease. Europeans turned to the African slave trade as a source of labor for the Americans. During the colonial periods of North and South America and the Caribbean, far more Africans than Europeans came to the New World. The slave trade brought wealth to some Europeans and some Africans, but the growth of slave trade disrupted African political systems, turned slave raiding into full-scale war, and robbed many African societies of their young men. The European success story in the America was achieved at the arduous expense of the millions of Native Americans who died and for the millions of Africans who were enslaved. This is the end of study session 1. Thank you for listening.